perhaps best just to begin by reading the poem. This is Jerusalem by William Blake. And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green? And was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And did the countenance divine shine forth upon our clouded hills? And was Jerusalem builded here among these dark satanic mills? Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear, O clouds, unfold. Bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental fight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. Overall, we can say of this poem that it starts with questions. It ends not so much with answers as resolutions. He's somewhat doubtful and astonished in the first two stanzas. Stanzas, you remember, are what paragraphs are. To prose, so for poems, the divisions are standards, just as in prose, irregular writing. The divisions are paragraphs. So this has 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. The first 2 stanzas are doubtful and astonished. Given the character of England, its normality, its general mildness, its resistance to enthusiastic and ecstatic things, to great events, could there possibly be divinity there? Those are the uncertainties, the doubts. It doesn't seem like that's natural in the first 2 stanzas. And the last 2 show Blake's resolution to make that happen, to bring the higher dimension that goes up to heaven down to what seems like the extremely mild and earthly place of England. To go into more detail, the first 2 stanzas have clear references to Jesus, who is the Lamb of God. He's the pure sacrifice, the mild and humble divinity who suffers for humanity and is understood by believers to be everywhere. Of course, there was a real human being, Jesus, who lived in this part of the world, but believers think of him as universal, going everywhere. And Blake is asking the question: Could Jesus be here in England? Clearly is officially honored in England as the religion, the official religion. Blake lived in the 19th century, a very churchy time. There's much observance of religion and the signs and symbols, the buildings and the people drawing salaries from the church. That was everywhere. But can one imagine the real Jesus being here in England? England then has a couple of aspects. He makes some references to what stand out about England. What is it that makes it very English? And this is it's somehow typical of the English, or at least a concern well represented among poets, that England seems to be a small place, a cozy place, somewhat protected from grand events and higher emotions, and that from the point of view of a poet is perhaps good, but also bad. It's small and cozy England where the sun rarely shines. Things are wet and damp. They're pleasant, which would be opposed to thrilling or exciting or earth-shaking. And this view of England is somehow the opposite of an adventurous place. Is quite common. You see it in one place is in the Lord of the Rings stories, the books and the movies. The Shire represents something like this view of England, of course, and it's the Shire is not where adventures happen. The Shire is in some way the safe place from which you travel outward to find danger and adventure. But then Blake is wondering with that same idea. Things are sweet and pleasant, but not dramatic and important here in England. But can the two worlds be brought together? So the clouded hills, right? It's always raining in England, very wet weather. This is a main component of this idea. The mountains are green. It's sweet and nice. Of course, the English mountains are very short as mountains go. And that's put together with the references to Jesus. Can you imagine the real human being and also, of course, the divine human being, Jesus walking here? The countenance divine would, the face of Jesus. Not a normal face, but not a normal face. Jesus looking at you as, it happened to some people in real life, but of course for believers in the religion, Jesus looking at you is more something looking into your soul. And can these two things go together? And then Jesus as a symbol of the link between heaven and earth, so as a divine man who actually had a human life and a human history. And can we believe that that extra dimension of life would settle down here in England, which seems to have special powers to resist anything enthusiastic or extreme? And there's another note in this. We see the reference to the dark satanic mills. That's a reference to the Industrial Revolution, something you will remember from Civ 102. That they're like hell, they're on fire and belching black smoke. The changes in England, that it's become a place of dreadful factory work and ugly industry, make it even less plausible. I mean, it's harder to stretch your imagination to think that a divine being would touch down here. Jerusalem, then, is a city of the imagination. It's, of course, not the real city of Jerusalem, but the question of whether it can be built here in England is, can we change our society so that it somehow incorporates this possibility that the divine would touch earth in the way that Jesus has shown to the believers? Can we make this thrilling possibility and then somehow access to the fourth dimension that goes between earth and heaven? Can we make that real? We somehow change the nation so that it becomes a more spiritual thing. He doesn't define it more than that, but that's what it means to him to build Jerusalem here. In the third stanza, we see Blake calling for his weapons. It's not so much that he has a curiosity about whether the things he talked about in the first two stanzas is possible, but that he has a resolution to make it happen. And for that, he feels the need to be armed. It's not an intellectual quest. It's not a persuasion that he's got to make happen, not an argument with a conclusion, rhetoric that you could make people agree with you. He thinks of it as a fight. And his weapons are halfway between real weapons and something different, weapons of enthusiasm and attitude. That he's calling on the clouds to unfold. The weather is terrible in England. The sun hardly ever shines, and the clouds seem to cover up the view of heaven. But he wants them to roll back, to be opened up, to be unfolded like an envelope, so that he can see, or perhaps feel more strongly, the fourth dimension up to heaven, and the way that will work. The second line of the third stanza is he wants arrows of desire. So somehow his the keen desire he feels to build a new nation, a new society, different arrangements. That desire itself will be weapons for him. This, in the Romantic movement, is a strong idea, or a defining idea. That one's enthusiasm, even the powers of our desires, the modern world tends to satisfy us and stupefy us, or to damp us down, take us from the condition of being lovers willing to do brave and crazy things for what we love. They take us from that condition to being safe and satisfied. And that the strength of desire doesn't simply need weapons, but is itself a weapon that may be used to change things to some better condition that perhaps we can't see clearly, but only exists as a beautiful image in our imagination. And the final stanza is his final resolution, that he's committed. He's not questioning. He's not even done with his question and explaining his arguments. He's fighting, and it will be mental fight. So somewhere on the border between actual fighting and being a dispassionate scientist or logician explaining points of view. In some way, he's got his spirit on a military footing. We don't really understand what that means. He doesn't make it clearer than that. But that his sword will not sleep in his hand, that he's got extreme and broad and violent actions to do, because the present needs to be fought in terms of on behalf of some better imagined future. And then the change is to build the holy city of God here in England, where it seems unlikely, because England is sweet and mild, and the challenge asks for something bold and aggressive.